Hi, and welcome back to our latest storytelling sessions regarding my novel, Secrets. Frank has been investigating the murder of his neighbor Vernon Ritchie and has questioned almost everybody in the neighborhood with the exception of Carmen Cockrell and her son Ray, who is dating Ann Ritchie. And according to Shirley, there was a lot of conflict there between her and Vernon when he was alive, and Carmen Cockrell and her son, because Vernon and Shirley opposed their impending engagement, even though the two young people are only seniors in high school. Plus, there was the rumor that Vernon had heard that Ray dealt drugs at the high school. So Frank goes over and knocks on the door and is let in by Carmen, and Ray is there, and not surprisingly, Ann also. And Frank sits on the couch and says, I'm just over here to talk about Vernon, see if you know anything that might be useful in the investigation. And Ann pipes up and says, Frank is working with Detective Paul Murray and trying to find out who killed Dad. And Ray said, well, I assume you think that I'm a potential suspect because Vernon and I had many arguments over my relationship with Ann. And Carmen injected and she said, it's ridiculous to think that either one of us, me or my son, could be involved in Vernon's murder over such a argument as this. And Ann said, let me put all this to rest, because she said there's something that I haven't brought up before because I didn't see a need for it. But she said on that particular night when Dad received a phone call and left to go down to his office, she said that about that time Ray came over, as he often does, and he was going to spend the night with me, which he did. And my mother had gone off to work at 4 o'clock, the second shift at the hospital, and she ordinarily didn't come home until after midnight. In fact, on that night she didn't come home until about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And Frank says, well, that's a wonderful alibi, but can anybody substantiate it? And Ann says, well, there's Lisa and Caleb, my brother and sister, they certainly knew about it. And at this point in time, Frank thinks it's best to let Paul Murray follow up on this, because he doesn't want to question these two children. So anyway, he leaves the Cockrell house and walks down by the lake on his way home. And when he comes abreast of the next house, he's hailed by J.W. Zimmerman, who's up on his deck, and says, Frank, come on up, let's have a beer. So Frank goes on up. He's a little bit leery. He doesn't know if J.W. knows that Frank, had spent the night with Gail recently. Gail had told him that J.W. doesn't seem to care that she works for an escort agency. So Frank thought this was a good opportunity to find out just exactly what J.W.'s attitude was. But J.W. immediately launched into talking to Frank about his favorite subject, which was professional football. And as he noted, there were some preseason games going on at the time, and he told Frank that he lived for the professional football season ever since he was a small boy growing up in Chicago, where his dad had season tickets to the Bears game. And he tells Frank that when Green Bay came to town to play the Bears, that was the greatest evening of the year. It was the 4th of July and Thanksgiving and Christmas all rolled into one. So Frank is thinking about how to broach the subject of Vernon, and he finally says, you're a criminal defense lawyer, J.W. He said, what have you heard about Vernon's death and the investigation being conducted by the sheriff's office? And J.W. says, well, I really haven't heard much of anything, Frank. He said, I don't represent anyone in the neighborhood. He said, I didn't know about Luke Wright until, I had heard that he had been killed by Nancy. He said, I just really haven't paid that much of attention. So Frank doesn't know whether to believe him or not, but he eventually goes on his way and arrives home to find that Paul Murray is there again, and they go out on Frank's deck with some beers and sit down and review the case one more time, go over all the suspects. And Murray says to Frank, he said, in my experience with murder and murderers, he said, there are really three categories. He said there's murder for financial gain, for money. He said, and that encompasses the vast majority of murders. He said, secondly, there's murder for jealousy. And he said, thirdly, there's murder for revenge. He said, quite frankly, he said, the one motive that we have here that sticks out most to me is the relationship between Shirley, Vernon's wife, and her next door neighbor, Jesse Fernandez. There's certainly a money element there. Shirley may have found out about Vernon's relationships with all the women in the neighborhood and decided to kill him, and Jesse was her tool. She could easily have gotten him to do it, in return for which she would use Vernon's life insurance money to help Jesse not lose his investment in the subdivision. And Frank says, yeah, and he says there's a whole bunch of people with a jealousy motive, including my wife, including Kathy Iverson. For all we know, Vernon could have been blackmailing Gail Zimmerman. And Murray picks up on this and says, yeah, and then there's the category of revenge. And the only one that really fits into that is Ray Cockrell, and apparently you don't really believe that he's capable of that. And Frank says it doesn't really look like it. So we'll end this session there, and we'll pick it up on the final session, which will reveal the secret that drove somebody in the neighborhood to murder Vernon Ritchie. It's already been laid out for you. I hope you picked up on it. I'm Michael Smith. See you the next time.